My name is Matt Ayers, and I'm interviewing Miss Eileen Levison. We are at 199 North Main Street, the NECIC building. Today is Friday, July 15, 2011, and the time is 9:59 a.m. Good morning, Miss Levison. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
All right, so we'll start with some real basic questions. Were you born in Mansfield?
Yes, I was.
All right, why did your family originally settle in Mansfield?
Oh my. Well, I think the Schuler side of the family came to Mansfield for business opportunities to open up a business. My grandfather Schuler always ran a business that sold liquor and cigars.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I had a brother, Edward Schuler, yes.
So what was life like in your family growing up?
Oh my, well, I lived at the corner of 5th and Walnut, and that was a busy neighborhood because it was very close to the center of town, and there was always activity, and I enjoyed just being on the porches and watching the different things go by. It was always fun to see the circus parade when they came, when the circus unloaded. They always came up 5th Street to go out to the fairgrounds. That was one major event. And then there were always peddlers coming around to the doors. So it was kind of an exciting neighborhood.
All right, so where did your parents work?
My father worked at the Wagner Hardware Company, which was just a couple of blocks from our house, so he could walk to work every morning. My mother, of course, was a homemaker. In those days, most women didn't go out of the home to work.
So what was the Wagner Hardware Company? What was it?
That was a wholesale hardware company.
Okay. I noticed, I'm sorry.
Well, it was in Mansfield for many years, and yes.
I noticed in your book, did it say something about your father working for Altman Taylor?
Yes, briefly he did.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you tell us anything about that? That hasn't come up in any of our interviews, and we're really interested in that business in particular.
Well, they were a major manufacturer of farm machinery. In fact, they sold machinery throughout the United States and even abroad. And I recently just discovered that my grandmother's brother, who was John Metzger, worked there for 40-some years. And I have some of the Altman Taylor publications, and his picture is in one of them. And I just recently discovered that he was related to me.
But then, okay, so then the Wagner Hardware, that was, you say, wholesale?
Yes.
So it wasn't like a hardware store?
No.
Okay. And where was that located?
At Diamond and 5th. It's where Tritico is now located, in that building.
Great.
All right, so where did you go to school growing up?
West 5th Street School, and it was very convenient. I could just walk up 5th Street from my house to go to school. I could even walk home for lunchtime and go back after lunch.
Now, is that the same building that's there now? Or
Yes.
it is the same?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, where did you go after you went to the 5th Street school?
John Simpson Junior High, and that too was very convenient because I could walk there from my home. Yes.
And did you go to senior high then after that?
Oh, yes, I went to senior high and graduated in the class of 44. And some of us still get together now and then. It's really nice. Had a lot of nice friends in that class.
All right, are there any teachers you remember especially well?
Oh, I remember a lot of them, but none of them really stands out.
Okay. All right, so were you involved in any activities in school?
Yes, I liked sports, but at that time the girls didn't participate like they do now in sports. But I always enjoyed gym class, and especially at senior high, the swimming. I belong to the GAA, which is the Girls Athletics Association, and enjoyed that.
So you said you did play. Did you get to play any sports then, like organized sports at all, or are they just more like recreational stuff?
Just recreational. I can remember playing badminton in the gym at John Simpson Junior High with some friends of mine, and that was a lot of fun, but it wasn't anything organized by, officially organized or anything.
All right, so did you go to college after high school?
No, I didn't. I was married the same year I graduated.
All right, so what was your first job?
Clerking at Scattergood's department store while I was still in high school. I took what they called distributive education, which let you have a job and attend high school at the same time. And you were graded on your performance at your job site. Then my first job after I graduated was in the office at Westinghouse, but I only stayed there a short time after I was married, because my husband was in the service and I followed him to California for a while.
Now, whereabouts was, you said it was at Scattergood's department store?
Yes.
Did I say that right? Where was that?
Actually, it went from, it was on 3rd Street between Main and Walnut Street. Extended the whole block there. And I've recently looked into the history of Scattergood's, and I've written an article on it, because when I worked there, I kept a scrapbook on the store, and so I had a lot of good information there. And actually, my uncle managed the store for years and years. He worked there for 70-some years, and so I had a lot of good information on that store.
So what can you tell us about, I mean, what was a department store like in the 40s? What kind of things did they sell?
Oh, well, during the war, that was during the war years, and that was interesting because they were substituting, like the jewelry, they had no metal jewelry at that time. It was all, it looked like plastic to me. I'm not sure that it was plastic. It might have been Bakelite or something like that. And hosiery was so hard to get that nylon, of course, was being used by the military. And when we would get a few hose in, there would be a lineup of women to see who could possibly get 1 or 2 pairs of hosiery. And if one of the neighboring department stores got some, we clerks would take some time off and get in the line at Maxwell's or Reed's to try to get some hose. And then there were substitutes in as far as the material. We sold yard goods, and they were making substitutes for silk and woolen and things that were difficult to find. So that's when some of the things came in. One of the things that was amusing, they found a substitute for woolen material that actually was made out of a milk product. And it was fine, people liked it until it got damp, and then it smelled like sour milk, so that didn't go over too big.
All right, so what was the neighborhood like when you were growing up?
Oh, well, I always had some really nice playmates, and we had made a little clubhouse out of an old, what used to be an old coal house that stored coal for the winter, and we tried, they were no longer using it for that, so we cleaned it out a little bit and used that. We had a bank in front of our house. In the wintertime, we'd slide down the bank on sleds. And of course, we played the usual games, kick the can and hopscotch and so forth on the sidewalks around our house. When there was a downpour, we would go out and wade in the gutters in our bare feet, and we enjoyed that.
Do you remember some of the stores and restaurants in the neighborhood at all?
I remember the corner grocery store, restaurants. In those days, we did not eat out at restaurants, but the corner grocery store, the closest one was at the corner of Mulberry and Fifth, and it was owned by Mr. Adam Dare. And we kids would drive him crazy going up there every time we got a penny to buy some penny candy, and if we got a nickel, we could get maybe a popsicle or something like that, which was a real special treat.
Now, I noticed in your book that you had sort of a map of the Walnut Street, Fifth Street intersection. Can you describe kind of what was around you? And one thing I noticed also is that there was a railroad track that, at least according to the map, went up
Yes.
Walnut Street there?
Yes.
Is that correct? And I'll let you...
Well, it came up Fifth Street and crossed over into the freight yard, which was across from my house.
Okay.
And I mentioned in my book that in the wintertime, you would see people collecting pieces of coal that had fallen off of the trains just to help heat their houses. In the summertime, sometimes a freight car full of watermelons would be pulled over into the freight lot off of Fifth Street there, and the boys would try to climb up and push a couple of watermelons off to get a treat. And then, well, we had ice delivered for our ice box, and when that wagon came down the street, the kids would run out and try to get a chip of ice out of the back of the ice wagon while the man was delivering ice to the houses along Fifth. The freight yard caused a lot of dirt and smoke and soot, and so that caused my mother to constantly be washing curtains, and our windowsills would have soot because the windows in our old house did not fit snugly like windows do today.
So the freight yard that you're referring to, it's the B&O freight yard, which would have been like directly across Fifth Street from your home?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you mentioned I may have this, like a biscuit factory, cracker factory or something
Right.
across?
The
is that-
National Biscuit
Nat-
Company was right across the street from our house.
And that
directly across.
they were just manufacturing, like,
Well, they baked cookies there, I know, for a time when I was a kid because they smelled so good.
Wow.
And then I could smell the coffee beans being roasted at the Bispin Company. So the neighborhood smelled really good.
Not bad. Now, the Bisman Company being in the Bisman building that's still standing here today, is that?
Yes, yes, they were an
Okay.
active wholesale grocery
Okay.
company at the time, yes.
So what was that like? Were they, I mean, was it just trucks coming in, or was it primarily railroad? I mean, or was it distributing throughout the Mansfield area? Or, I mean, do you even know anything about that?
I
or-
really don't.
Okay.
I really don't know.
So I see these docks over here, and I just picture trucks coming in and out, and, but obviously there was a lot more
I'm sure
railroad.
they had, but that didn't impress me as a
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, what about, do you know anything about the Majestic Theater that was on, right here on Walnut, if I'm not mistaken? Is that?
yes, I
Where-
went there occasionally, and the Ritz Theater was down in North Main.
Okay.
And I went there. I went to the movies an awful lot. It was very cheap. I think it was only a dime to get in the Ritz on Saturday, and you probably could see a double feature for 10 cents. But,
Where was the Majestic Theater?
oh, I'm sure it was above 4th Street and on the east side of the street, but I can't tell you exactly
Okay.
the location anymore.
And do you know anything about, I'd heard that it burnt down. Do you know anything about that, or was that later?
I don't know
Okay.
about that.
Okay. What about any other sort of landmarks, businesses on Walnut Street or any of the surrounding areas that come to mind, or?
Let's see. I remember the old Ritz Nut Shop on Main Street next to the theater. And, when they roasted nuts that smelled so good.
Oh,
And we often had roasted redskins from that nut shop. They were excellent. The only other, well, of course, there were a lot of bars on Main Street, and right at the corner of Main and Fifth was a bar. As a kid, I was not allowed to go very far out of my neighborhood
Mhm.
because of the bars and some of the people that roamed around on the streets
Yeah.
in the north part of town.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned in your book a lot of sort of transient folks coming off the trains, and
Right.
is that what you're referring to, or just kind? I mean, I understand that the Flats was kind of, somewhat seedy. I mean, is that the impression?
Oh, yes, the neighborhood was not upscale at all.
Yeah, you have a lot of industrial workers, people
Yes.
coming in and out of town. Is that a
Yes.
correct sort of?
Right,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Sorry.
All right, so how do you think the neighborhood's different today then?
Oh, the old neighborhood?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. I don't know much about it today, but, most of a lot of the houses that were there, it was a residential neighborhood, which actually bordered on, like the train tracks and the more industrial neighborhood. It was kind of a border neighborhood, I would say. And so much of it has been removed, torn down, and I'm sure my old house is going to be torn down one of these days because it's in such disrepair that's pathetic.
Yeah.
So I don't think, it certainly is not a residential neighborhood anymore.
Can you tell us anything about the sort of ethnic makeup of the neighborhood when you were growing up? I mean, I understand your family was German immigrants. Is that?
Well, yeah, German, English, Irish background, but no, there weren't any African Americans right directly in my neighborhood, and as far as ethnic minorities, I don't know of any.
Okay.
They seem to all be just ordinary, Americans,
Okay.
as far as that goes. I did, some of the kids that went to West Fifth School, there was more of a mixture there among my friends. And I remember I had a very good friend, Annie Zivkoff, and her parents had a business down on North Main Street. And another friend of mine, Alex Tanasevich, his father had a bar on 6th Street, and he hung around, I think it was called Mayor's Drug Store, which was at the corner of 6th and Main. And he, probably the influence he received there, he became a pharmacist himself and worked at Med Central for many years. And then he moved to the Cleveland area later in life.
All right. So, do you remember anything about what Mansfield was like in the the 40s and maybe even later on in the 50s at all? How it changed? Anything like that? Any memories?
Well, the downfall of the central part of Mansfield was, of course, the creation of the Johnny Appleseed, and Center and Park Avenue, creating the malls out there. And to me, it was really sad to lose the wonderful stores, that everything was located downtown, centrally located, and you could take care of all kinds of business in the downtown area. Anything you wanted was right there. And now we have to drive for miles to.
Do you remember about a time when that started to change, like when the businesses and everything started, moving out? I guess it would be west, expanding west. Do you remember it all, the time period?
It probably was in the 50s, I would imagine.
Can you tell us any specific memories of what, any businesses in the downtown that stand out, or anything that?
Well, of course, the department stores were wonderful, the Reeds and the Maxwells and Scattergoods. But when I was growing up, we had Penny's and Montgomery Ward's, Sears, Roebuck, all the main department stores. And then we had specialty clothing stores such as Golden Russells for women and Goldsmiths for men, and even hat stores that just sold hats for women. Well, like I say, there was just everything in the central part of Mansfield, and it was exciting, and it was busy, and I miss it still.
Yeah.
Quick question about Maxwell's. My mom, as a little girl, remembered going there with her parents, and I was just curious about the fire that happened. If anybody knows, I've asked some other folks, the circumstances of what happened. We've seen the pictures of that. There's that really good picture of it when it was on fire. I was just curious if you knew anything about that at all.
I don't remember anything about the fire.
Okay.
It was sad.
Yeah.
To lose that. But of course, they've all gone now, all the rest of them too. Not because of fire, but because of the changing economy and so forth.
I was also wondering, you mentioned it a little bit, but could you tell us a little bit more about, you mentioned this in your book, and earlier you said there were vendors that would come through. You mentioned the ice vendor. One specific question about that, some of our other elders were telling us that they used to have a little card that they would put in the window of the house to tell the iceman how much ice they wanted.
Yes.
Is that something you remember as well, or?
Yes. I
Okay.
hadn't thought of that for a long time.
Yeah.
Yes.
What other types of things were people going door to door selling, or is that how it worked? I mean, tell us about that a little bit.
Well, during the Depression, people were going door to door selling anything. Even in the springtime, someone might come wanting you to buy a bunch of dandelion greens for a nickel or something. Boys would come around with magazines. They would have a canvas bag slung over their shoulder, and maybe be selling like the Liberty magazine for a nickel or a dime. We would have people come wanting to sharpen your knives. And then there was a man, I think his name was Peters, that had that raised produce, and he would come around with a horse-drawn wagon in the summertime with produce on the back of his wagon. Anything anybody could think of to try to peddle, they would be at your door. And of course, with our central location, we constantly had people knocking at the door wanting us to buy something.
Now, this might be a really dumb question, but you keep using the term wagon. Now, I mean, these were automobiles, right? We're not talking.
No, this was a horse-drawn
They're
wagon.
really horse-drawn.
Yes.
Now, this would have been in like the 30s, 40s. They were still
in
using.
The 30s.
Really? Now, I don't know why I find that surprising, but I didn't realize that was still. So there were automobiles clearly,
Oh, yes.
but so people. Wow, sorry, that kind of blew my mind a little bit. Interesting. Okay.
All right, so did you go to church in the area at all when you were growing up?
Oh, yes. My family belonged to St. Luke's Lutheran Church. My great-grandmother was a charter member there, and when I attended there, my aunts and uncles, grandparents on both sides, all went to St. Luke's Lutheran Church. And we could walk up there from our house, and St. Luke's was located at the point of Marion and Park Avenue, so it was within walking distance. My family didn't own a car until, I don't know what date, but we didn't have one for most of my childhood. We relied on my grandmother and aunt, who never married and lived with my grandmother. They lived on Marion Avenue, and they owned a Chandler car, which was, I looked it up, it was made in Cleveland. And whenever we went any place in an automobile, it was in the old Chandler, that they would come down to our house and pick us up. But we walked every place. Just walked uptown, walked to church, walked to school. And you could go uptown and shop for your groceries at, they had wonderful meat markets uptown. And the 3rd Street Market was a special favorite because they had everything there. They had a fish market, they had 3 meat markets, and they had all kinds of produce, and an ice cream stall. So it was a real treat to go up to the 3rd Street Market and shop.
Now, whereabouts on 3rd Street was that located? Do you
It
remember?
was at the corner of 3rd and Walnut.
Okay.
Now, some of the other residents have talked about some of the stores would do almost like credit, I guess it would be called. Like you come in and, on a Monday and get your groceries, and then when you got paid on Friday, they would come back and pay. Did you have any experiences with your family with any of the stores like that in the area?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. So what do you think the role of the church is, and what the role was of the church in your community growing up?
Well, there were many, of course, Mansfield was known as City of Churches, so there were churches all over the place, and especially in the downtown area. All the big churches that are now in the outlying areas were downtown when I was growing up. And I suppose the role of the churches at that time mainly was to educate people about their religion and their beliefs. I don't think they did as many outreach programs as maybe they do today, like feeding the hungry and so forth. It was mostly just serving their own congregation.
So do you remember some of the ones that were downtown that moved outward?
Oh, yes, the big Presbyterian church, I remember that, and the Congregational church that burned, now I remember that. And I used to sing in the treble choir, which met at the Congregational church, and it was directed by a woman named Thurza Hazeltine. And once a month, we would sing for their service. So we visited other churches occasionally.
All right, so tell us about your fondest memory growing up in the North End area.
Oh my fondest memory. Oh my.
If you have more than one, that's all right too.
Oh dear. Well, I think the fact that my parents were very open for entertaining and having company and so forth. And so I think my fondest memories were the dinners that we would have. If someone dropped in, my mother was always able to scramble around and find a meal to serve them. And so we had a lot of relatives drop in. Maybe they were from out of town or from across town. My grandmother, who lived in the country, that was my grandmother Loomis, she would come and spend a day at our house. And her husband would go uptown to visit his brother that managed the scattergood store, and then come back to our house and we would share a meal. I think just the hospitality of my parents and entertaining and having company was one of my fondest memories.
Do you have a worse memory at all?
My goodness. I can't say that I do.
That's excellent.
I thought I had a great childhood.
Yes, that's good.
Growing up there. And I really appreciate what my parents did for me in providing that childhood.
If it's all right, could I ask you a personal question?
Certainly.
Is it, how do you feel, I mean, I know your house is, the house you grew up in is still standing there. I know we read from your book, your father was born there as well, right?
Yes.
I mean, do you have any kind of, I don't know, does it bring back any memories or anything? Do you have any feelings when you drive by there and stuff like that?
Well, when I started writing the book about the corner of 5th and Walnut, I thought that perhaps I hadn't been down there for years. I thought maybe the house was already torn down. And I was delighted to see that it was still standing. But when I go past today, it is so dilapidated. It really, I wish that it could be restored, but I doubt that's ever going to happen. So it's probably one of those things that's going to, this progress, probably going to be torn down someday. And I hate to see it happen. A lot of people think that that house has interesting architecture and would like to see it restored. And of course I would too, but it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I think we're under the impression, your family doesn't own that house anymore, right? It was,
Oh,
it was
no.
bought by somebody else?
They sold it back in the 40s.
Oh, okay.
Early 40s, yes.
I had a question about your other book about Native American history. You know, it's in Ohio as a whole, right?
Yes.
Okay. And did you, in any of your research, come up with anything very local at all in terms of like North End or Mansfield? Anything you can share with us going way back, so to speak? I don't know if anything such thing exists.
You mean as far as the Indians?
Yeah, anything you can shed light on, because really, just the fact that you've written this book, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but just wondering.
Well, in my book on Mansfield, I don't know if you've read Mansfield, Ohio, a town in the wilderness. I mentioned the Indians in that and how the blockhouses were built to protect the settlers from Indian attacks. And I think it's 3 times great-grandmother wrote a poem of how she was so fearful of the Indians. And of course, the Copus Massacre occurred in the area, not in Mansfield, but there was retaliation and so forth. That's as much as I know about the Indians concerned,
Okay.
in early Mansfield.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that book, I did come upon that in my other research, but it's been so long since I read it. But I'll have to go back and take a look at that. But
Yeah.
just always interested in, in my research, the earliest that I could find any sort of reference to what we call the North End was the Civil War camps. Is like I say, as far as I could tell, looking at old maps and things, you can kind of see where some of the street names came from like Johns Park area. I think there was a Johns family that had a large farm out there, Stocking family,
Right.
things like that. But that's as far back as I could go. So I was just curious if you could shed any light on that. But could you tell us, you mentioned the circus folks coming to town on the train, and then they would, you said go down 5th to go to the, what
To the
was the
fairgrounds.
old fairgrounds, which is where Taylor Metal is now?
Yes.
Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Okay. Any other memories about that, or?
Well, later in the day, the circus would have a parade that would come down Main Street, and of course we would go over to Main Street to watch the parade with everybody dressed in their costumes and the clowns and so forth. yes, it was a great day when the circus unloaded and came up Fifth Street with elephants and horses, and the animals, well, like lions and so forth, would be in closed cages at that point, but
I bet that was something to see.
it was very exciting for kids, I'll tell you.
Yeah. What about like the county fair and things like that? Did you ever go out? I don't know, what was that like back then? Was that something that people did, or did you ever?
I didn't. I don't recall even going to the county fair.
Okay. What did you have?
I was just gonna say about the circus. Was like the same circus that would come through every year? Or was it just different ones depending on who was in the
They could be
area?
different ones. It was probably Barnum and Bailey mostly.
Mhm.
So they would put up their big posters, paste them on sides of buildings, and so you would know when they were coming.
Did you have anything else you want to add that we haven't covered at all?
Hmm. I don't think so.
Yeah, I have one more quick question. As a teenager, what sorts of recreational activities did you do? I know you mentioned the movies and the things you did at school. Anything else that?
Well, I was given a pair of ice skates, and we would ice skate at North Lake Park. Let's see, occasionally the school would have dances. Of course, I would attend the school dances. Well, North Lake Park was very exciting in those days. They during the summer they would have pony rides. There was a roller coaster. You could rent a rowboat and go for a row on North Lake Park Lake, and they had the roller rink there. So in the summertime you could go to an outdoor movie at North Lake Park for probably a nickel or a dime. I was very much involved in Mr. Smart's accordion band, which played at North Lake Park on Sundays during the summer. And I was always in, like I mentioned, the treble choir and the school choir and things like that. Those were the things that kept me busy. I was taking accordion lessons and voice lessons at the time. So.
Now, would you, like when you would go to North Lake Park, would you just walk down there? Or I understand there was a trolley that you could take at one point. Is that anything you would do?
Well, when I went to swim, usually my aunt would pick me up in the Chandler. Later on, when I got a bicycle, I was now and then allowed to ride my bike out to North Lake Park.
And would you swim at the swimming pool there, or were you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, okay, interesting. Anything else, Madge?
I think we've
Covered lots.
Oh, did you have anything to do with the Friendly House at all? Does that mean anything to you?
No, well, one summer when I was probably around 16 or 17, I helped out at the Hidden Hollow camp for a week. But outside of that, I knew Friendly House was there, and that's about it.
Okay. All right, well, I think we've gone through all of our questions that we have. Want to thank you very much
yeah,
for
we very much appreciate it.
Well,
taking the
thank
time
you.
out to speak to us. So.
You're very patient.
Oh, no.
It's a good interview. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
it's
got a lot of
excellent.
good information. So.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure.